The Dynaudio Contour 20 Black Edition may look almost identical to the Contour 20i, but looks can be deceiving. And the Danish loudspeaker company, I think, has packed quite a few changes under the hood of this long popular stand mount speaker. I'm Michael Johnson with The Absolute Sound. Today I'm going to be walking you through what I think is one of the most significant stand mount speakers of 2025.
Hi, my name is Martin Bell. I'm the founder and CEO of Java Hi-Fi. We're an amplifier manufacturer from New Zealand. Well, I think we wanted to do something different. We wanted to use some new technologies. We wanted to have some new industrial design. I came up with the name Java Hi-Fi because I am a real coffee aficionado, and of course Java is slang for coffee, and hence that has carried through to the naming of the single shot and the double shot. It was 4 letters. We were able to make a cool kind of waveform logo out of the name. And I'd like to think perhaps that I'm something like a conductor of an orchestra. I'm not necessarily the engineer or the designer, but I can work with great people in those fields to bring a product to life.
About 5 years ago, Danish speaker manufacturer Dynaudio launched a significant update to their Contour line of speakers, which sit firmly in the middle, this middle ground between their entry-level and their more high-end offerings. The base stand mount model in that line is the Contour 20i. It has been immensely popular and is still on sale today. However, this year, Dynaudio revealed a limited edition redesign of the 20i that they are calling the Contour 20 Black Edition, named so perhaps because they only offer this model in piano black. Essentially, what the company has done is kept the 20i's cabinet and tried to squeeze as many component upgrades into the box as humanly possible. This has resulted in a bookshelf speaker that sits closer in price to the Confidence line, coming in at $8,000 per pair. Let's talk first about the core design of this speaker and then cover all the components that make this speaker a special edition, and just what the engineers over in Denmark have tried to accomplish with this model. At the core of the design philosophy of the Contour line is a curved cabinet and an aluminum front baffle. This has been the primary design feature of all Contour models since they launched way back in 2014. This cabinet next to me here, which is shared with the standard 20i model, is made of 18mm MDF. The solid aluminum front baffle, which covers 80% of the front face of the speaker, might look like a thin faceplate, but besides the outer lip, it actually sits 14mm deep into the cabinet. Dynaudio have stated that the goal in designing the Contour 20 Black Edition was to see the limits of performance they could reach within the confines of the existing Contour cabinet. The first thing the engineers did was to swap the Esotar 2 tweeter with their top-of-the-line Esotar 3. This is the soft dome tweeter that's found in the company's flagship products, including the Heritage line and their Confidence line. The 7-inch bass/mid-range woofer, which is made of Dynaudio's proprietary magnesium silicate polymer, say that 4 times fast, may look like the driver in the 20i, but it's actually a new design that was specifically made for this model. This driver is powered by a neodymium magnet, which allowed them to design a more dynamic and efficient driver without sacrificing space inside the cabinet that would cause problems with restricted airflow and distortion. The bass port on the rear of the Black Edition is significantly wider in diameter than the port found on the 20i. This port is actually tuned higher than the port on the 20i, but the wider diameter results in increased airflow and what the company is claiming is a much greater dynamic range. This is kind of shown if you look at the specs of the 20i model and the Black Edition. The 20i model has a plus or minus 3 dB roll-off at 39 Hz, while this new 20 Black Edition actually rolls off around 50. Finally, the crossover of this speaker features a new design with fewer and higher quality components in the signal chain. The crossover frequency of this two-way speaker also has been raised from 2200 Hz on the 20i to now 3200 Hz. Last month, Dynaudio North America actually came in person to my listening room to set up these new Contour 20 Black Edition. And I always appreciate when companies take the time to do this because it ensures the sound and placement that I'm experiencing in my room is optimal based on the many setups the company has done in other environments. It also means that what I'm hearing in my room is as close as possible to what the manufacturer intends, at least always with the variable of room dimensions and acoustics taken into account. Dynaudio also provided a pair of their aluminum bookshelf stands, simply called the Stand 20, with a top plate that screws directly into the base of the speaker, coupling the two units together. These stands also contain compartments that are fillable with sand for more density and rigidity. Now, most high-quality speaker stands allow for sand or other type of filament, but I'm not sure if I've ever encountered stands that come with their own plastic liners so that you don't have to get sand on your shiny new speaker stands. Now, given my short time with the black editions, I didn't end up filling the stands, but if I were to own these permanently, that's probably one of the first things I would do. Is, in my experience, more mass and a rigid design such as this is usually never a bad thing. Now, I haven't heard the 20i in a very long time, and I've never had them in my own system, so all I can really do is judge this new black edition like I would any other high-performance stand mount speaker. Throughout my time with the Dynaudios, I partnered them with 3 different amplifiers: the Audia FLS9 integrated amplifier, the Accuphase E800S integrated, and my personal reference, the Hagel H30 power amp. At 86 dB sensitivity with a 4 ohm nominal impedance, these speakers are going to want power. The Accuphase, which provided 100 watts per channel into 4 ohms in Class A, it didn't struggle to make these speakers play loud, but I felt that something was missing from their presentation, part of which was a less than energetic handling of micro and macro dynamics. The Audia, which is a Class AB design, is capable of delivering up to 290 watts per channel into a 4 ohm load, and I think that did substantially better in pairing with this demanding speaker. However, it actually wasn't until I hooked these up to the H30, which the company claims can deliver 675 watts into a 4 ohm load, that I started to realize the capabilities of this loudspeaker, especially in terms of energy and bass texture. So the H30, connected with a pair of Kimber 12TC speaker cables, is what I used for the majority of this review. Absolute Sound viewers may not know this, but I actually have a long-running connection to Dynaudio loudspeakers. One of my early experiences in a showroom listening environment featured a very impressive set of Dynaudio floor standers that captivated me. This was probably around age 20 when I was living in New York City. And then a few years later, after I was done cutting my teeth on almost a dozen pair of vintage speakers from JBL 4311s to Boston Acoustics A200s, I finally committed to my first modern high-end pair of speakers, and that was the Dynaudio Focus 340. It's a line that they no longer produce, at least in passive form. So I don't have a lot of experience with the Contour line from this company, but the Dynaudio house sound is one I'm very familiar with. I've always felt like most Dynaudio speakers I've heard have done quite well at riding the line of neutrality. The company's commitment to soft dome tweeter design has prevented anyone from accusing them of harshness, particularly in the treble. Despite that, I think they also steer far away from anyone accusing them of being an audible fuzzy blanket. After getting the 20 Black Editions set up in my space, the familiar even sound I've come to know the company for was certainly there, but it was at a performance level that I wasn't expecting, especially in my relatively small listening room. Scrolling through familiar tracks on Qobuz, I got the sense that this speaker had a powerful projection of instruments across a wide soundstage, while demonstrating the ability to completely disappear from the room. Playing Carnival from Natalie Merchant's album Tiger Lily, I had a sense of a very strong and accurate bass response, being for a speaker with a 50 hertz cutoff, but I was immediately drawn to instruments in the mid-range and treble register, including the electric guitar melody in the introduction that seemed to be projecting tangibly in my listening room with this kind of white-hot energy, particularly at the start and through the decay of the notes. After listening to this introduction, I was then surprised when Merchant's vocals came into the mix and felt much closer to me, the listener, almost like the space around each of the instruments and Natalie herself was substantial and wide. Merchant's vocals here were clearly recorded in an intimate setting, and it feels as if she was sitting just 4 or 5 feet in front of my listening position. The Esotar 3 tweeter was proving its value on this track, as I heard so much refined detail in the female vocals of Merchant, particularly the ends of her notes, and every little way she would lift at the end of her phrases. I completely spaced out on the little subtle details because the delivery of this register of music was so unfatiguing. I felt free to get lost in the details without any repercussions. When this song gets going, Merchant starts introducing vocal overdubs to complement her main line, and on a lot of speakers I've heard, this effect is just making the voice sound thicker. But when I was listening on the 20 Black Edition, These overdubs felt much more harmonious, and even though it's the same vocalist singing each line, it felt much more like a collaborative effort that was providing scale and richness to the moment. I then transitioned to another female vocal track, and that is a little different. It's Bad Guy by Billie Eilish, which has become a bit of an audiophile standard in the last couple years. The production on this song and most Eilish tracks in general do a great job of combining contemporary electronic music trends with a very refined and visceral sonic presentation. The refinement comes from the recording of Eilish's vocals, which are breathy, nuanced in the delivery. She sings with a subtlety, and I think there's great contrast to the driving rhythms of the production, which is composed by her brother, Phineas O'Connell. The transient energy of the bass in this song was, I think, well portrayed by the 20 Blacks. There was an incredible transient impact on the start of the note in the driving bass lines of this song, but I did understand that I was still listening to a stand mount speaker with a roll-off of 50 Hz. Because of this, I didn't get the weight or the heft of the bass that I wanted in my reference system. If I wanted to do that, I had to include the use of my subwoofer, the Rel T7X. Now, Dynaudio do make a line of subwoofers, the Sub 3 and the Sub 6, that will probably pair very well with these speakers if you want that full range, kind of visceral bass experience. Unfortunately, I didn't get to try one of those for this review, but it's something I would like to experience with this speaker at some point in the future, because this is a bookshelf that I believe does probably benefit from a well-integrated subwoofer. Going back to the Billie Eilish track, if I moved to the other remarkable things in this song, for me it would be how silky and extended the overtones of Eilish's voice are portrayed through this speaker. It's almost as if the texture of her voice extends far above the confines of the ceiling of my listening room. Further, the snaps that come along later in this song, they're rendered with this incredible textural clarity, and I once again get lost in the little details that this speaker throws out there, including actually being able to hear the individual snaps as part of the larger group, rather than just hearing kind of one sound that sounds like a larger snap. Now, Dynaudio make pretty big claims about the headroom of this loudspeaker, both in terms of dynamics, but also in the ability to play cleanly at high volumes. For the latter experience, I turned to a track from Deftones' sophomore album, Around the Fur, and that's the song My Own Summer. On this song, it didn't matter how far I pushed the Contour 20 Black Edition. They maintained their poise, and all the instrumental details I could hear at kind of mid-level volumes were just as present, and when pushed, and that tonal clarity pretty much stayed consistent throughout. For instance, one of the stars of this track is the snare drum, which is played at this really high level power, this really ferocious intensity, even in the less extreme, more subtle moments of the verse. This particular snare drum had a high-pitched kind of tinny quality, and as I was listening to the song, I was transfixed at trying to imagine the actual physical instrument and what that instrument must look like to make that specific sound. And even as the heavier guitars and bass came in, as the chorus crashed down in my listening room, and I was engulfed in Chino Moreno's high shrieks and this thick, overwhelming distortion, I kept focusing on the sound of that snare drum, and it didn't waver no matter what else was going on in the sound of the song. Eventually, after you go through enough review tracks, you want to sit down and listen to some albums, and I hope that this special edition of the Contour 20 would be the thing I needed to help me understand Fleetwood Mac's ambitious, somewhat controversial 1979 album Tusk. This album is much more varied in both instrumentation and in recording techniques compared to previous Fleetwood Mac efforts. I found in listening to this album through the 20s that I was picking up how different sonically many of these songs sounded from one another. Not only that, but I became fascinated with trying to unravel some of the thick instrumentation and overdubs that littered these songs. On track 1 of side 2 of this album, which is What Makes You Think You're the One, I think this speaker really helps me listen through the fog to hear all the different parts that make up the whole. And despite that level of detail retrieval, songs after that showed me other strengths of the speaker, such as how substantial their dynamic breadth was. The clean electric guitar sound in Storms, it was so rich, especially in the mid-range. But what really sold me was how alive the dynamics felt, is I could really sense and hear the rise and fall of the phrases that Lindsey Buckingham was playing on the guitar. I thought that dynamic delivery was there in the treble as well, particularly in Stevie Nicks' vocal delivery which would always change ever so slightly based on the range she was trying to sing in. When she would subtly strain for those notes that were a bit further up in her register, not only would I hear the dynamic shift of her going for those notes, but I also heard the change in color as she, I wouldn't say strain because she's a great singer, but she would change the color of her voice a bit to get to those notes, and everything, when she did that, became slightly coarser in texture. After that, I went to play a classic chamber recording on Mercury Living Presence, and that was János Starker playing a recital program with his longtime pianist and collaborator, György Szabó. I actually started with side 2 on this album because that has the Debussy Sonata in D minor on it, which is one of my favorite pieces in the cello repertoire. The very first opening piano chord of that piece, it exploded out of the soundstage. And I say the soundstage because these speakers really do disappear, and the sound that you hear when properly set up will come from far beyond the walls of your listening room. And that's definitely how I felt listening to this recording on the 20 Black Edition. This recording is a very natural acoustic recording with only 2 musicians, but the dynamic capabilities of this speaker, I think, allow even a 2-person classical chamber recording to sound larger than life. From Szabó's opening chords to the entrance of Starker when he comes in, these musicians fill the space with energy and this super, super rich tone. I will say, I think this is another example of the Esotar 3 tweeters showing off, because it didn't matter if I was listening to this recording or any of my classic Decca violin recordings, the realism of the string tone on this speaker, I think, is astounding. On the right recording, the string sound portrayed, it will have this natural rich decay, particularly in the upper frequencies, that just ascends and dissipates in the room. I think this is incredibly hard to get right, because many speakers that have this level of detail just, to me, sound too dry, particularly in the decay of the sound of the instruments like violin, viola, and cello. And what I mean by this is the decay is usually just too short, and the instrument comes out of blackness, it emerges from that blackness, but it recedes back into the deadness way too quickly. And what I was hearing with this speaker was a rich, natural decay of the instrument. And if this is a type of music, like records like this, if this is what you turn to often, you may want to give the Contour 20 Black Edition a try, because this is by far, I think, one of its biggest strengths. Finally, I'll bring up this wonderful Tone Poet reissue of Bobby Hutcherson's 1968 album, Total Eclipse. He did this album with Chick Corea, and anyone that listens to these Rudy Van Gelder Blue Note recordings with any frequency, you're going to be familiar with the soundstage presented by his Hackensack home recording studio. Van Gelder has a tendency to dramatically pan the instruments in his stereo recordings. And how solidly the different instruments appear in their respective corners of the quote-unquote room really tests the imaging quality of your system. With the Dynaudios, the instruments had remarkable solidity to them, particularly Hutcherson's Vibes, which were just slightly to the right of dead of center, but also the cymbals on Joe Chambers' kit placed way far off to the right, which expressed a wide variety of color based on how he's playing, how hard he was hitting, where on the cymbal he was hitting them. I think that was just all portrayed excellently through the 20 Black Edition. But now, to bring us back from musical examples into some primary points, I want to express, for this speaker, I would say that despite being very good in almost every area, the Contour 20 Black Edition stands out in 2 ways. One, this speaker is able to portray a vast, detailed, and expansive soundstage pretty much no matter how complex the music. Stand mount speakers are often good at disappearing, but I think it's rare that you find the speaker that can make your room sound way larger than it is. The second point is that this speaker has a remarkable and explosive dynamic range at both the small and the large scale. And I'm just not used to small box speakers that can do that, can express this level of dynamic ability, particularly a low efficiency 86 dB speaker like this. If these are qualities that sound like something you're looking for in a bookshelf loudspeaker, especially one under $10,000 US, I just don't know if you're going to find a candidate better than this Dynaudio Contour 20 Black Edition. That's not to say that this speaker doesn't have any limitations. The one that nagged at me, I think overall, was its low frequency roll-off. and it's not unusual for a bookshelf speaker. However, when I compare it to, I would say, similarly priced Harbeth 30.2 XD monitors, which are my reference, on paper, those speakers have the same 50 Hz cutoff, but I felt the bass response on that speaker was substantially stronger and thicker and juicier than that of the Dynaudios. I also felt that speaker had a bit more velvety richness in the mid-range, but the downside is it did that with a much smaller and less expansive soundstage, and I think a much less refined high-frequency presentation. If you want that visceral bass experience or just more meat on the bone in general, what you can do is you can pair these speakers with a subwoofer of your choice, whether another brand or Dynaudio's in-house solution. But what you should know that there's an answer to that problem. And a sub should not be taboo in a discussion about a two-way bookshelf monitor like this. Another limitation, I think, is how amplifier picky this speaker is. I heard substantial differences in sound quality based on what I paired these speakers with. And every increase in power and current based on the amplifier I picked notably increased performance from the speaker. So be mindful that if you get the chance to evaluate these, just know that to really experience some of the benefits I'm talking about, you probably need a substantial amplifier. But really, I think that's a sign that these bookshelf speakers are basically playing in the high end, because that caveat, you're going to find that in a lot of very expensive loudspeakers. They're very amplifier picky. Listen, if you're a listener that is short on space, but you're interested in getting the most high-end experience possible from a two-way stand mount design, I can't think of many products out there that check more boxes than the Dynaudio Contour 20 Black Edition. Perhaps the best part about this speaker is that it's voiced to please a wide range and variety of listeners. This is because I think speakers put out a high quantity of detail, a really immense and immersive soundstage that expands beyond the confines of your listening room, and it does all that with a very striking dynamic ability. All of this happens without any shine, without any brightness on the music. And more detailed speakers than this speaker exist out there, but I think there are few, especially in this price bracket, that do so without fatiguing the listener. At $8,000, you pair this monitor with a competent sub and a robust amplifier, and you're going to have a system that can give a wide variety of larger tower speakers a run for their money. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts on the Dynaudio Contour 20 Black Edition. We want to hear yours. Please leave a comment down below, and if you liked this review, feel free to hit those like and subscribe buttons to please the algorithm gods so that more reviews and hi-fi related content like this shows up right in your feed. Until next time.